Diabetes Connections is brought to you by inhaled insulin, glucose management in the moment, and by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, I talk a lot about my son with type 1, but as many of you know, I also have a daughter who doesn't have diabetes. What's it like to grow up with a sibling who gets more attention for something you can't do anything about?
Jealous isn't the right word, but I was very aware of how much time you were spending with him at night because you never lied about it. You weren't like, oh, I have to go do this random thing, take this book. It's like your brother is having a situation and I have to go deal with the situation. So it wasn't that I was unaware that you were going to go deal with him, but I was very aware of how much time you spent with him and what it was for, and it was for diabetes.
Leah was 5 when her little brother was diagnosed. She is now 21, and we had a wide-ranging discussion about attention, what happens at school and on the bus, and about how our family looked at food. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. I am your host, Stacey Sims. You know we aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. As this episode goes live, it is Thanksgiving week, and I really hope that you're able to be with family, if that is your wish, and that it is not too stressful for everybody between, travel this week and all the food. Especially for newer families to diabetes, it can be very difficult and stressful, but it can also be such a joyous time. I love Thanksgiving. There's no presents, there's no pressure other than on the food. And I don't cook. Slade, my husband, takes care of all that. So while we host it every year, I get the fun part and I clean up. But my daughter is coming home from college for the whole week. And I figured, we're talking about family in this interview. So it's maybe good timing to put this episode out this week. I also want to say before we really get started, huge thank you to Macy's Believers. If you listened last week, I was so frazzled because of all the stuff that had kind of come to a head here at one time, and then I was traveling, but I'm really glad I went. And I have a bit more to say, especially if you have a teen with type 1. You're going to want to hear about something that happened at this event, so I will bring that back after the interview. Big thanks, too, to everybody who came out to my book launch here in Charlotte. It was a rainy night. What a mess. But it was so much fun. We posted pictures on social. Thank you so much. Yes, the book is on sale. Still the world's worst diabetes mom. It's on Amazon, ebook and paperback. The audiobook is coming in just a couple of weeks. We are hard at work on that. There is an excerpt from this interview in the book. There is a whole chapter about siblings. And Leah and I have been very open throughout the years about how she feels about diabetes. We talked on the podcast in 2016 on Benny's 10th anniversary. I interviewed my whole family, and I will link up that episode. I'll be honest, it is hard for me to hear some of what Leah has to say, but I hope it helps you see that there really is no perfect in any of this, right? There is no perfect way to parent. There is no perfect way to parent with diabetes. And I found the sibling part of this to be very difficult throughout the years. So spoiler alert, I'm sorry to say we don't have all the answers to the big questions about siblings and type 1 diabetes, but we do have some examples of what worked for us. And I think what Leah has to say especially is going to be really helpful. All right, but first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Afrezza. And one of the most frustrating parts of mealtime insulin can be the need to pre-bolus. I've seen my son forget to do it or hesitate because he's not confident about meal timing in a restaurant or when he's out. Afrezza is unique because it is the only ultra-rapid-acting inhaled insulin available. Once you breathe Afrezza into your lungs using the inhaler, insulin appears in your bloodstream in less than 1 minute, and it may start reducing blood sugar in about 12 minutes. Afrezza allows you to inhale your insulin right when food arrives, even unexpectedly, so you can be spontaneous but still in control without the need for injections at mealtime. Find out more, see if Afrezza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afrezza logo. Afrezza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium, and is not for patients with chronic lung disease such as asthma or COPD, or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you ever smoked, ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you are pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afrezza. Afrezza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, medication guide, and instructions for use on afrezza.com/safety. Hello, Leah, and welcome to Diabetes Connections.
Hi, Mom.
We were just talking off mic about how awkward this is, so hopefully it'll get a little easier as we go.
It'll be fine.
It'll be wonderful. You did this about 6 years ago. My listeners had some questions, and I thought this would be a really good time to just kind of catch up while you're home. You're home from spring break. You're a junior in college. You're the mysterious child we don't talk about very often.
Love that.
And that's true not just for the podcast, but for social media as well, which I want to ask you about a little bit later on.
Okay.
All right, let's start, though, with when you were much younger.
Taking me back.
Let's go back. You were 5 when Benny was diagnosed. You had just turned 5. You're 3 years apart in age, but 4 years apart in school.
This will be relevant later.
Yeah, which is an important distinction. Tell me a little bit about what, if anything, you remember about that time.
Ooh. I remember when he was born, and then probably nothing until we were in a hospital, and he had those sticky electrode things.
The monitor things
all over his body. He was crying. He was very upset about it. I didn't really know what was happening, but I knew that my brother was like crying and being annoying. So I was like, and it was really late at night. And my mom, we were all there in this room at the doctor's. And I'm like, why are we here? What's happening? Like this had never happened to me. So I'm like, what's wrong with him? But then I was like, not my problem. And we left. So
I wonder if you're conflating two different memories. You probably aren't, but I mean, who knows?
I might be. I was 5.
When you talk about it that way, I remember two things. It'll be fun to ask Dad, too, what he remembers. I'm sure Benny remembers nothing. But there were 2 days that you were with us. The first was the Monday we brought Benny in when we thought something was going on. We went to the pediatrician's office. And for some reason, we all went, like you came with us, too. And we put you outside the room with your Leapster.
Oh, my God.
Your little electronic Leapster game. Because we didn't realize they were going to draw blood from him, not from you.
Oh.
So he was screaming bloody murder, like freaking out because they had to do a blood draw.
Of course.
And, you were outside and we were like, don't worry, he's okay. And you were worried. I know you deny ever being concerned, but you were worried about him. So that's the one time when he was really freaking out. At the hospital, when we all went, when they said several days later, get down here, something's really wrong. He was pulling off those electrodes, like you called him.
Yeah, that's the memory I have of him, like on that table.
Yeah, I'm sure that's not even what they're called, but you were like, he was like a little baby Hulk. Like,
oh my God. Yeah, he was not happy about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that we purposefully did was we decided not to ask you to be responsible for his diabetes. This didn't mean you didn't help. Again, I'm sure you don't remember, but in the beginning, it was kind of like when he first came out of the hospital, right? And the older child is very helpful. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, when are we sending this kid back?
Yes, exactly.
It really fell into that same pattern of you wanting to help and being really interested. And then once things calmed down, you were like, I'm done. Yeah. And we never felt that we wanted to put more responsibility on you than the older sibling already had. So fast forward to Benny going to kindergarten. And when he went to kindergarten, you were already in 4th grade.
Yes.
Which is important. Yes. So I remember there was a big issue about the bus, if you want to talk about that.
This is the only time it happened because, again, we are 4 years apart in school. And so elementary was sort of the only time that we were together a lot. But in elementary school, we would take the bus. And on the bus, you had assigned seating based on your grade. So the younger grades would sit towards the front of the bus. And the older grades would sit towards the back of the bus. And it's a big privilege in 4th or 5th grade to sort of sit in the back of the bus. You're all cool now. You get to sit with your friends. And so the first day of 4th grade, rather than getting to sit in the back of the bus with all my friends, I have to sit in the front seat right behind the bus driver. This still makes me very upset. Sorry about that. I'm still mad about it. With my younger brother because he has diabetes. And they're like, you have to keep an eye on him. Now, up until this point, I have not been keeping an eye on this kid. Like, this is not my problem. My parents are dealing with it. I'm just like, he's my weird younger brother who has diabetes. And like, that's a thing, I guess. So I was very upset about this. And I told my mom and she got it all figured out. I didn't have to sit with him anymore because I wasn't doing anything. It wasn't like I was checking his blood sugar on the bus or like making him do it himself. Like, it was just, I don't know what they expected me to do, but I didn't do anything. It was very quickly sorted out, but still some resentment there.
Well, it's a very strange situation because we never asked for that. that did not come from us. We talked to the bus driver, and like most school districts, they were like, yeah, whatever, right? If we have an emergency, we'll call 911. But we did make it clear that he was able to eat or drink on the bus if need be. Obviously, we freaked the bus driver out and nobody told us. And also, as you're listening, keep in mind, Benny had been living with diabetes for close to 4 years. And he had spent the summer before kindergarten learning how, he already knew how to do it, but learning how to poke his finger himself and look at his pump himself and do everything himself with supervision. So we were in a different place than I think a lot of kids who might have been at that age and more recently diagnosed, where I felt perfectly confident saying, well, if he feels low, he's going to get a Gatorade. Or his friends that he had been playing with for, we had a really great block and he had lots of friends. If his friends noticed he was looking weird, they would alert the bus driver. They knew to tell Benny to drink his juice. We did not make Leah sit with him. That's
what they want you to think.
We did give both kids a talk, though. And that was not the first time we gave you the talk about how you are responsible for each other because you are brother and sister.
Yes.
So if somebody's picking on you or something happens, like you need to be there for each other and stick up for each other and look out for each other, but not because of diabetes. That fell under. Obviously, you didn't really believe us. It was just because of diabetes. But as soon as the bus driver, in my defense, as soon as we heard what was going on, and it wasn't that fast. I think it was 2 weeks. I think you sucked it up for a long time.
No way. I thought it was only a couple of days. I don't remember this huge resentment piling up. I think it was, for me, from what I remember, it was a couple of isolated incidents where like, as soon as you heard about it, you were like, absolutely not. This is not what we need.
As soon as we heard about it, we fixed it.
Yeah.
I just think you just were one of these kids who were like, well, that's the situation. I'm going to deal with it. You were not a big complainer, unlike another child I have who enjoys complaining at every opportunity. Not to throw Benny, who's not here, under the bus, but...
No, please do. It's okay.
So we fixed that really quickly. And then after that, you saw each other at school, but I don't remember a time where they ever called me and said, Leah says Benny is in trouble. You didn't see each other. You were in 4th grade. He was in kindergarten, right?
Yeah. One, the school is just like big enough that you wouldn't see everybody all the time. But also, you're right. Like kindergarten and 4th grade are very different grades, very different situations. But also, by the time we were at school together, he'd had it for 4 years. He'd sort of kind of learned how to deal with it. It became such a normal thing in our lives that it was never like, oh my God, he has to do a diabetes thing. It's like, yeah, he does diabetes things all the time because he's always had diabetes. When things like that would happen, it wouldn't even register because I'm like, oh, they got to do a diabetes thing real quick. This thing is happening. They're gonna figure it out. Like there was never any like cause for panic. Nothing ever happened where it was like, this is something we don't know how to deal with because you'd been dealing with it for a while and you will continue to deal with it. So they never like blipped on my radar as like things to worry about or things to like be concerned about or to have a conversation with you guys because they were totally normal. It was just like, this is what's happening. So why do we need to talk about it? Because like, it is what it is. And like, obviously I understood that other people didn't have diabetes, but it was like, I don't know, my friend has like this weird gray streak in her hair that's genetic. And like, everybody just has like weird shit happening to them. Can I curse on this show?
No, I'll bleep that out.
Tragic. But everybody has like weird stuff that they have or that they do. And it's just like totally normal for them. So diabetes was just normal for me.
My listeners wanted to know about how you handled, Benny getting more attention and what they can do to be better parents. And I want to set this part of the interview up by talking about, and I apologize in advance if Leah and I are working through some of our issues here publicly on the podcast.
This needs to happen.
Little therapy. But one of the things that I still feel bad about is how we handled bedtime a lot. And that is because your father and I, Slade and I, worked different shifts for a long time. So I was gone at 3 o'clock in the morning. I would leave for work 3:30. And he was getting home from work. He owned and operated a restaurant, midnight, 1 o'clock, that kind of thing. So basically, he was the full-time morning parent and I was the full-time evening parent. And it was fine, but it was really hard in some ways, especially, I don't know if you have little kids who, as you're listening, who are terrified of certain parts of their diabetes care, but for years, Benny was terrified of changing infusion sets. And it would take forever. And it was a lot of talking and cajoling and please. And I was I'm not the kind of parent that offered prizes. We didn't do sticker charts. None of that. I didn't even think about a sticker chart. As I'm saying it, maybe we tried it and dismissed it. But like, I'm not giving you a prize for that. Like, that's your life, unfortunately. And that was how we handled diabetes. Everybody is different. But what that meant was at least every 3 days, I was giving Leah a book. I'm like, please read this. I know that your bedtime is after your brother's, but I've got to settle this crazy
God.
issue down. And then, and we were always trying to do insets not at bedtime, but it always, like, just diabetes stuff always happened at bedtime, whatever it was. And I was always trying to deal with him and then deal with you. And I was exhausted. By 8 o'clock, I was a monster. And by 9 o'clock, I had no brain. Mm-hmm. That to me was one of the more difficult aspects of diabetes parenting, because I try to make bedtime is a great time. You want to tell stories. You want to talk about your day, and half the time I was like, hang on. And I'm sure you remember that.
Yeah, because it was never like you stuck me with a book I didn't want to read.
Thank God you like to read.
There were plenty of books. I love reading, plenty of books to read. But when you would run to Benny's room, so our rooms are right next to each other, right down the hall. And you would leave my door open. And most of the time you would also leave his door open because you're trying to do both things at once. And so I could always hear you two talking when I was either trying to distract myself with the book. 'Cause I'm like, okay, she's going to come back eventually, or whatever. And I could always hear you guys talking. And I was just jealous isn't the right word, but I was very aware of how much time you were spending with him at night, because you never lied about it. You weren't I have to go do this random thing, take this book. It's your brother is having a situation and I have to go deal with the situation. So it wasn't that I was unaware that you were going to go deal with him, but I was very aware of how much time you spent with him and what it was for. And it was for diabetes. It wasn't, well, I just want to read this book first, or oh, your bedtime is earlier, which yeah, but you had to get the diabetes stuff done before bedtime. So that was the problem. It stung a little bit, but it was also I can just read the book by myself, I guess, which is not a bad thing by itself, objectively, but I don't know. I would prefer to have read it with you, but I don't know, it's not something I can bring myself to be too upset about, even at the time, because I was I can hear you. I know you're
I'm not asking you to be upset. Don't worry.
Don't worry. We'll get to that. But I can't, I can literally hear you. I know you're only 10 feet away. Yeah. So you're going to be back eventually. So you have to wait my turn.
A couple of the questions were, how can I get this right? How can I make the other sibling feel like they are getting enough attention, or that the other kid isn't getting more attention? I'll answer that first, and I'd love to hear what you think. I don't think you can. I think even if Dad had been home every night, I don't think that you can give a child with diabetes and a child without diabetes the exact same amount of attention. It's just unfortunately not how life works. And I think the way I managed it was to try to be honest about it, at least, and tell you, like you said, I wasn't pretending oh, I'll be back soon because I have to clean my room or I have to make tomorrow's lunches. It was no, I'm dealing with your brother.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to talk to your kids about it and to acknowledge, look, nobody likes diabetes. Yes, he gets more attention. It's not for the best reason. That is not going to matter. Attention is attention. So the other sibling is not going to be I understand perfectly now. Thank you for explaining. They're still going to be bummed. But in my opinion, honest communication, even with a 5-year-old, at least lets them know that you respect them enough. Or thank God I see you nodding. Tell me more, Leah.
So that's definitely a big part of it, is that if you're honest with your child or your kids about what's happening, the respect is a big thing. Because if you're oh, I was 5, that's it's totally okay to lie to children, because children don't need to know everything.
I used to tell you everything I drank was coffee. Because you knew you didn't like coffee.
Oh my God.
So if I was having a Diet Coke or something I didn't want you to drink, I'd be it's coffee.
See, my mother's perfectly capable of lying to children. However, when it came to diabetes, I think because it was such a huge thing, it really just flipped our entire family around. And it wasn't it would ever be something he could hide from me. The fact that you were honest about it definitely helped with the transition. It's not the right word, because for me, it's he was born with it.
Right.
Because, when he was actually born, I was 3 or 4, and I have no concept of between then and him being diagnosed, it's the same person. But if you had tried to lie about it or tried to hide it, it would have been even worse, because I was very aware that you and Dad were spending all this time with him. I'd be but why? Because if you didn't give me this reason, it'd be oh, well, they like him better than me, or he's the better child, or they hate me and they want to get rid of me, which is not something that I ever thought, because you never did that. But it's what is a child supposed to think if you're just totally lying to, even lies of omission or whatever that is?
That's exactly it. Lies of omission.
Lies of omission. Even if you're not directly lying to them and you're just not saying anything about it, that's almost worse, because it's what are you hiding from me? Why won't you tell me? Is it something I did? Because there's no context from the other child. You're just spending all this time with them for seemingly no reason, so it must be something I did. But luckily, that did not happen. I at least had a reason to fall back on. It never felt like a good enough reason. One, because I'm very selfish and I need all the attention. And, I love my parents and my parents love me and I just need that constantly all the time. But, it was something where I could be like, okay, at least there is a reason. My brother always had diabetes to me. And so it was like him and the diabetes are the same thing. Yeah. And so to say that, oh, well, we have to do all these things because he has this chronic condition, on the one hand, sure, I can like kind of understand that as a 5-year-old. And then even later on in childhood, you have like a logical understanding, what diseases are. But at the same time, him and his diabetes have been one and the same for both of our entire lives, that I can't just be like, oh yeah, he's got diabetes, he's got to do the diabetes stuff. It's like, no, he is the diabetes is him. And so he needs all the attention because he is him, not because of the diabetes. Our situation is a little different because I'm an older sibling. I was the first child, the superior child, and then he was born. It's definitely different if your first kid has diabetes and then you have a second kid that doesn't have diabetes. Even in families without any chronic conditions or anything like that, you have a second child and they obviously need more attention because they're a baby. Like they can't do anything. So I feel like that's a thing that all siblings go through, is that, a younger child is obviously going to need more attention, like from your parents. Like the parents always have to be there and always do things. But you had to do it even more because of the diabetes. And so it was already like general sibling resentment of like, oh my God, I have to share everything now. And like also he's got this weird thing going on that you're just like always in his room. The kitchen smells like insulin a lot, but like I guess you like have to give him shots or something.
I think that's another difference between younger and older. I know a lot of siblings. I know a lot of families where the younger child does not have type 1 and they kind of come into it like, they want to be like their older sibling. They want to be supportive in a different way. And then the older sibling's like, leave me alone.
Yeah, it's definitely, well, I had an experience of a life without diabetes, however short it may have been. The things that you did for Benny, like pricking your finger, those were not things I had to do at his age. And so I was like, I guess this is a thing that's happening, but also he's annoying. And like, sure, I can prick my finger and that was kind of cool and fun. But like, I don't want to get shots and like, I don't want to have to deal with like counting calories, like how much food I'm eating and then having to like bolus for insulin. I'm like, this is not my problem. Like this is so much that I don't have to do. And so I like kind of don't care.
It's funny you said calories because of course we don't count calories. We count carbs.
Oh my God.
But you mentioned the Calorie King book. Like you distinctly remember that.
So we had this book. Was it the Calorie King? Calorie King. And
that's probably why you think calories.
And you would go through and you'd find the foods that you were eating and how many carbs were in them. And then you would bolus. But that book was at every meal. Every meal, somebody would have it. It would just be like sitting on the edge of our table. Like it would just sit there all the time, ready for meals. I would just like read through it sometimes because it was there. Yeah. Everybody was constantly looking at it. And I was like, oh, this is fun. This is cool information. But it wasn't like, oh, I should start using it too. It was like, Benny has diabetes. This is for diabetes. This is a diabetes thing and therefore not my problem.
I'm glad to hear you say that because one of the things we really were careful about was, we had been warned, and I'm so thankful. I followed a lot of adults with type 1 very early on. And there was a lot of, I wouldn't say warnings, that makes it sound a little different than it was, but I would read in blogs and I would hear in conversations about how when they were restricted as children, and it was very different because the insulins were different, 30, 40 years ago, that they still had issues with food. And I had never heard the term disordered eating. I'd only heard eating disorders. And so that really helped me focus on not creating an environment where disordered eating could blossom. I think we were very lucky. I mean, you have to be lucky, right? You could still do everything quote unquote perfect, and you're still focusing on food so much that it certainly could have happened. But we also never said, oh, that has this many carbs in it, you can't eat it.
You also never used it as a cookbook. It was never like, oh, this has fewer carbs, so we'll make this instead of that.
Oh, yeah.
It was always like an ending step. Dad would make whatever he wanted for dinner, and we'd eat it, and then it'd be like, okay, this is how much you ate. This is how many carbs were in that. It was never like a forefront thinking. It was always just like, oh, okay, you ate whatever you wanted, and this is how much you have to bolus for. It was never like, we're only going to bolus for this much. Or like, you can only eat this much, so that's what we're going to make for you. And like, God forbid, you never like made different meals for Benny. It was never like, oh, you're diabetic, so you can't eat that. We're gonna make you this thing, and we're all gonna eat this food that you can't eat.
Oh, that's first of all, I'm way too lazy. I don't cook like that. I barely cook at all. But that's a good point. We can get off the topic here, but I could see where it's like, well, I'm dieting. So there's a lot of households, right? Where the mom will be like, I'm only eating this, but the kids in the family can eat that. So once again, too lazy. I enjoy food too much. So that's not going to happen. But it is interesting. I mean, we also, and you may not remember this, when you were growing up, we had a rule that you had to tell us what you were eating. That rule went out the window after elementary school, right? Because once you could reach the cabinets and you guys could both cook, I mean, quote unquote cook, you could boil pasta, you could make eggs, you could make mac and cheese, you could make chicken nuggets.
Amazing. Listen, the core food groups.
But you could do that early on. I still remember when you and Benny started like cutting things with knives. Like Slade, my husband is he loves to cook, restaurant background, the whole thing. So we always had like these gigantic knives and he taught you guys how to use them. And I was like, oh my God, stop cutting fruit. Go eat some cheese doodles.
Stop cutting fruit.
My point was when you were younger, I used to say like, let me know what you're eating. And that rule I made for both of you because I did think it would be a problem if only Benny had to say what he was eating. And literally it would be, I'm eating goldfish. Okay.
Okay, that I do remember.
Right, Mom, I'm going to have a snack. Okay. Like it wasn't, let me see what you're eating and I'm going to weigh it.
That's what I thought you meant. And I was like, I do not remember that. But I do remember just like yelling up and down the stairs, like, I'm eating this, or like I grabbed this out of the cabinet. But it's important that it was for both of us. It wasn't just for Benny because of his diabetes. And it wasn't just for me because you were like, you shouldn't eat that. Or like girls shouldn't, what is it? A moment on the lips and it like forever on the hips or whatever.
Oh my God.
Which is never something you said to me, to be clear.
It was said to me.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, it wasn't something that you were concerned about for me. You weren't like, you shouldn't eat that much or anything like that. It's very important that you made it for both of us, however short-lived it was.
Food is hard all around. And again, that could be a whole other podcast. I think the diabetes definitely brought it more into focus for me. But it was also a combination of, the age I am, the generation I am. We've learned so much about how harmful image, food, eating disorders around girls and boys, can be that I'm really happy that both of you, knock on wood, seem to, we're never out of the woods, but we seem to have been doing okay. And that was something that I was really careful about. So some of that was because of diabetes. It was more focused, but some of that was just the parenting style I wanted to have. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about diabetes and attention. Because I tried, some of the things I tried, and it made it a little bit easier because we had a boy and a girl. So it could be like, Dad's taking Benny somewhere and I'm going to take Leah on a girls' weekend or, stuff like that. And so we tried to do things just the two of us, or even just with him, where you would get more attention and kind of be on your own. Did any of that sink in?
The way I've tried to think about it is, there's general attention where it's like you are a child and you need love and attention to survive. And I got plenty of that. No worries. But it always felt like you had like extra reserves of attention. And it was like extra credit attention. Where it was like, oh, if you want to do something fun, like just the two of us, if we want to do like a girls trip, or like if me and Dad wanted to like go do something together, like go to the store or whatever, that always felt like extra credit attention. And it felt like Benny got all of the extra credit attention all of the time. And sure, it was for diabetes or whatever, but he was still getting it. The diabetes wasn't getting the attention. It was Benny. It's not like you can just like do his diabetes thing and he's like not aware of it or like I'm still there. Like, no, it was all for him. And that was my perception of what was happening. A lot of this happened when we were very young, as I've already shown. I don't have very clear memories of it all. But, I would talk to you guys about it. And you're like, oh, like he gets more attention. This is so stupid. Whatever, he's got diabetes. Let's move on. Like, this is a very emotional thing as a child. And so I would be like sitting on the top of our stairs crying because he's getting more attention. And you're like, well, yeah, he is. And I'm like, that's not helpful. It's like, no, sure. Like, I already got that part. That's why I'm upset. There was never any solution that you offered, but there was never any solution you could have offered. There's no answer to this. It's not like you can just stop being like, yeah, whatever. Okay. He's like, what, 6? He can do it on his own. Like now it's fine. I don't have to like do anything for him. Okay. Let me like give all of my attention to my other kid. That makes no sense. But at the time it was like, you are also my parents. I want the extra credit attention as well, please. Thank you. And it's just like, he got it all the time. And then I would try and talk to you about it. And you could never reassure me that it wasn't happening because it was happening, which at the time just made everything worse. Because I'm like, okay, cool. We're all acknowledging that this is happening. it's not that my feelings didn't matter, because you were obviously, like, you were upset that I was upset, but there was nothing you could do about it. And so that just like made the whole thing so much worse, because it was like, yeah, he is getting more attention and there's nothing you can do about it.
That's hard for a kid because you think your parents have the solutions.
Exactly.
I mean, and I could have said, well, I will buy you a pony, but that's not obviously the way we roll. It's hard to sit here and listen to that because I want to fix it still. Like I want to go back and be like,
it's too late.
7-year-old Leah, it's okay. But I'm kind of glad that I didn't lie to you. It sounds like I could have been a little nicer maybe. You are in college. I
am.
Finishing up your junior year. You're at 20. Mm-hmm. Like we said, you're 4 years older. Benny is a junior, but you're 3 years older in age.
Yes.
He's a junior in high school. What's it like now? I mean, you're not around as much. You're home for spring break. It's nice to see you, but you're not around, although COVID, you were home for a while. But what is it like for you these days with diabetes?
So I think now it's less about the front phase of diabetes because Benny does so much of it by himself now. Honestly, at this point, I never see it unless he's in the kitchen, like coughing and like giving himself a new inset or whatever. But even then, that's been happening since like childhood, where like dad would like hold him and do it for him in the kitchen. For some reason, it's always in the kitchen.
Yeah, it is a lot in the kitchen. And by the way, he coughs. If you don't know the story, he coughs because if you cough, it confuses your body and takes away any pain from the needle. So I've talked about that before, but feel free to try that. Just don't wiggle if you're not doing it to yourself. If your child is coughing, make sure they're holding very still while you insert the needle.
Yeah. So it's no longer the front face of diabetes. It's no longer like, it was never in my face, but it was like, my brother was always there. It's not like we like kicked him out of the house for anything. So he was there, so the diabetes was there. But still, like, I have never been able to disconnect the two of them. And so he's there, so the diabetes is there. When I first came home from college, after, I think it was the like winter break of my freshman year, first of all, he had like a huge growth spurt. He became like an entirely different person. Physically and mentally, he's like a real person now. I can like have a real conversation with him. He's still a 17-year-old boy, which is like gross. But he has thoughts and feelings, which is a great improvement. So that was a whole other thing that I had to deal with, was like he has a personality and like friends and like ideas about the world that I have to like talk to him about. But the diabetes thing is like, you were still telling him to bolus after every meal. It was still, the book is gone. We no longer like take the little Calorie King book out. It's hidden in the house somewhere, I guess. It's still this like ever present thing that like you are obviously thinking about all the time. I don't know if he thinks about it all the time.
He does not. Spoiler alert.
But it was still there. And so because I've never been able to disconnect the two of them, the diabetes was still there. And so was my resentment towards him because of it, combined with the fact that he, again, has like real thoughts and feelings. I don't agree with all those thoughts and feelings. And so any kind of like argument or fight that we would always have this undertone of like the resentment I have carried for him our entire lives. It was never like, oh, I hate my sibling, but it was like, you got more attention than I did as a child. And like our parents were like, yeah, he gets more attention. Deal with it. And you always have the logic of like, yes, it's a chronic disease. He could never do it on his own as a child. And even now, he's not the most responsible 17-year-old in the world, which is fine. But when you add diabetes on top of it, like that can be a problem. But that doesn't mean anything when you're siblings, because it's like, yeah, I love him, but like I have always resented part of him for it.
Do you worry about him at all for diabetes stuff?
Oh, absolutely not. No. Once again, you never made it my problem. It was never, you are responsible for his life. It was never, you are responsible for making sure he gets insulin. You never tried to scare me about it. It was never, you and dad were never like, he needs this or he's going to die, or like, he can't eat these foods, or like, blah, 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 like this is going to happen. Sure, I understand like the science behind it of like what the pancreas is doing and like how a pump works, but like you never made it out to be this crazy, scary thing, which luckily we've always had access to insulin. But even if you had made it my responsibility as a child, I think I either would have ended up resenting you or just him more, because, if I had to sit next to him for the entire year, I'm sure eventually I would have had to do something diabetes related on that school bus. Or if I transferred out of the public school system, I went to a private school for high school. He did follow me for a couple of years, and then he went back to public school. If I had to follow him because I was his like diabetes protector, that would not have been great. Disruptions to the social life are never great, especially if they come from a sibling, because it's like, why do you get to live your life and I just have to follow you? Especially as an older sibling, because I was doing everything first. He got a phone before me because of his diabetes.
This again.
That's exactly
I'm
what
just
happened.
kidding. Yeah.
I got a phone when I graduated from elementary school and I went to middle school. He got it while he was still in elementary school because of his diabetes. It was still a phone. So a lot of things that like I was doing first, he would get earlier, which is a common thing with a lot of younger siblings anyway. But it was always with the caveat of like, because of his diabetes. And it's like, sure, but now he's still a little kid with a phone. And so like I was doing all these things. I got to do everything first. We all kind of like figured stuff out together. You know, like I went to college and now he's trying to figure out the college process.
Camp.
Yeah, I went to summer camp and then he went to the same summer camp. And it was a whole thing because you had to talk to all the nurses and be like, he has diabetes and we have to do this thing. And now I'm like, why do we have to talk to the nurses? You don't have to talk to the nurses about me. We had to like go to camp early and like talk to them. And I'm like, this is so stupid. This is my summer camp. I don't want to do this. And so it's not that I'm like openly hating my brother. I don't hate my brother. And I don't hate the fact that he has diabetes. I wish sometimes that I could get over that resentment sometimes. But also, like, it's been there my entire life in some form or another. I've never been mad at him for having diabetes because that makes no sense and, like, he can't do anything about that. But and I have no answer
That's
for,
right.
like, how to get rid of it.
Before I let you go,
Okay.
you're like my secret child.
Amazing.
I don't post about you very often. I don't talk about you very often. And
I love it.
Well, most of that is by request.
Yes.
Because years ago, you flat out asked me to not post much about you and to get, you know, just like I wouldn't say give permission, but you were like, could you just show me the photos before you post? And so if you do see anything that Leah's pictured in on my Instagram or Facebook, she has seen it. Like she knows it's coming. And kind of same thing with Benny. He adopted that after you. That's one thing he got from you.
Of course.
Yes, the superior sibling. That's one thing he got from you over these years, which I think as a parent, it makes it a little harder because I see lots of my friends posting a lot more, but I also feel really good about it. I am curious, you were a kid with no social media. You had social media when you were a senior in high school because Tulane asked you to get it, which is bizarre. What's up with that? Do you remember what you were thinking? I'm so glad you did that, but why? And do you think it has benefited you in the long run?
So moms can be embarrassing.
No.
And especially because Benny is younger, parents like to do lots of funny things with their young kids. Like they do all kinds of weird photo shoots or just like funny family pictures or whatever. And that was all very embarrassing as a child, especially because when I was in middle school, you know, like peak cringe, my parents are the worst. Benny was not. And so he was still in that age of like doing weird family shit. It was more about like, I saw what you were doing with Benny or what you were going to be doing with Benny. And I was like, I do not want that. But also because, you know, I would look at a picture, you'd be like about to post something, or I'd see that you had posted something, be like, oh, my face is so weird, or like I look so gross, and be like, oh, well, just like tell me next time, or like show me the pictures before you post them or whatever. But as I've grown up with the internet, there are a lot of people who do that, you know, they like post random pictures of their children, especially like very young children, with things that like just people should not be aware of. And there was never a fight about it. You were just like, yeah.
No, I totally understood it. I got it.
Yeah. But it was never like a distinct thought process. It was just like, oh my gosh, I look so gross in that photo. Why don't you just tell me next time before you post it and then I can like approve. But I'm really glad that you did it because then I like just don't have to worry about it. Because again, like I am so far from the diabetes world.
Yeah.
Which I know makes you sad.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't make me sad at all. It doesn't make me sad.
Okay.
No. I am grateful that you have grown up to be your own person. I mean, do I wish that you and Benny got along beautifully like you were poster children for perfect siblings? Of course.
You should have had different kids.
I should have raised you differently. But no, I'm very proud of you. And I'm very happy that diabetes-wise things turned out. Look, I could have, even though you were quote unquote older, right? Even though social media wasn't around until, okay, so how old are you? Let's say Facebook. I joined Facebook and Twitter in 2008.
Okay.
So you were 7.
Mm-hmm.
And I was blogging a little bit before then. I could have done like many, maybe this is you as you're listening, so I apologize, but as many parents of children with diabetes and other chronic conditions have done, I could have put my children front and center. We could have named the blog after you and Benny. And I could have done that. I thought at the time it was not a good idea. And I still think it's not a good idea. Even having written an entire book about your and your brother's childhood, we left out a lot of personal stuff. I'm very careful about what I share publicly, and we talk about a lot of it before I do it. And I think it would have been a big mistake for our parenting and family style to be like the Benny and Leah blog.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
I don't think that would have set you up for success. Benny probably would have been okay. He's a little bit more of an attention seeker like me. You're the introvert in the family. I think that that's fine. I mean, you're not totally introverted. I shouldn't set you up like that. But you know what I mean? Like you're not going to have a podcast tomorrow.
Right.
So all of that to say, I don't wish you were more part of the attention of diabetes. I think that what you're doing, even just with something like this, is really generous and will help people. I mean, of course, now I wish I could go back and redo parts of your childhood.
It's too late.
That's not how it works. That's not how it works.
Yeah. I mean, I turned out fine. It's not like you messed me up.
Wahaha.
But, you know.
You also got a question. Had you ever considered your career path, or had you ever considered advocacy or anything like that because of diabetes?
Okay.
You can be totally honest, because I think the answer is absolutely not.
The answer is absolutely not, but not for the reason you might think. It's not because of Benny, it's because of you.
Oh, no.
So, it was never a thought in my mind in the first place to do diabetes advocacy or go into the medical field and look at any of that. Because I just wasn't interested in it.
Right.
It wasn't because I hate diabetes and I hate my brother. It was just like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go into the medical field. Both of my parents are communications majors. I did not want to do communications. You started this podcast in 2015. I was a teenager. You go to conferences. I've been to conferences. And yeah, sometimes those conferences are at Disney World, and that's a good time. But I never wanted to do that. I saw what you were doing. You do great work. I could literally never.
But you're a geology, anthropology double major.
I am.
Which is very cool.
Yes, very unrelated to diabetes.
Well, Leah, thank you very much for joining me.
Of course.
I'll see you at dinner.
Yeah.
Love you, sweetie.
Love you.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
I'm so proud of that kid. I always say more information here in the show notes and at the episode homepage, but there is no more info linked up about Leah. I will link up our previous family episode that I mentioned, the one we did on Benny's 10-year diaversary, and I'll put some Thanksgiving episodes in those show notes as well. But yeah, she's a pretty private kid, so nothing to see here, nothing to link up. As I mentioned at the top of the show, I was in Florida recently for a gala for Macy's Believers, and I'm going to tell you about that, particularly something that really made an impact on me while I was there. I think it will resonate very much with adults who were diagnosed as teenagers and for parents of teens as well. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom, and we have been using the Dexcom system since Benny was 9. We started with Dexcom in December of 2013, almost 10 years now, and the system just keeps getting better. The Dexcom G6 is FDA permitted for no finger sticks for calibration and diabetes treatment decisions. You can share with up to 10 people from your smart device. The G6 has 10-day sensor wear, and the applicator is so easy, I have not done one insertion since we got it. Benny does them all himself. He's busy, and knowing that he can just take a quick glance at his blood glucose numbers to make better treatment decisions is reassuring. And of course, he still uses the alerts and alarms, and we love that we can set them how we want. If your glucose alerts and readings from the G6 do not match symptoms or expectations, use a blood glucose meter to make diabetes treatment decisions. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Macy's Believers is a fantastic group of people, and they support a lot of diabetes causes, but they particularly raise money these days for Friends for Life. What they do is they raise money for scholarships to send families to what can be a life-changing conference. You've heard me talk about Friends for Life many times. I go every year to the big conference in July in Orlando. It's really unparalleled when it comes to education, social stuff, fun stuff for families touched by diabetes. So Macy's Believers, great cause. And every year now, they started this in 2019, had to take a couple of years off for COVID, but every year they have a gala down in Florida, and it's very close to my parents' house. So when they asked me to speak in 2019, I was thrilled. When they asked me to come back, and this year I was the MC, which is even better. I love to do that. Of course, I said yes. So I got bonus time with my parents, and I got to go to this great event. So what I wanted to talk to you about, and I'll make this quick. You can see it on social. I'll link it up and I'll put it in the Facebook group. The Diabetes Connections Facebook group is Macy. Macy is a person. It's Macey. It's not Macy's, the department store. I'm sure they get asked that a lot, but it is Macy's Believers. That is for her. She was diagnosed as a tiny baby, 13 months old with type 1, and she's now 20. Incredibly talented singer, by the way, but that's not what she's going for her career. But she spoke at the event, and she spoke while dressed in a gorgeous evening gown with like a letterman's jacket. right? Like one of those varsity bomber jacket kind of things that you'd see high school kids wear. And she talked about how she wore that jacket all through high school, all through the Florida heat, to cover up her diabetes devices, how self-conscious she was, how much it bothered her, how different she felt. And talking about how she got to the point now where, and she took the jacket off, she's just beautiful and she has her devices on her arms. She blinged them out, like her Omnipod was all blinged out, her Dexcom was all sparkly, and it was a great moment. But she shared about how difficult it is to be a kid with this stuff and how self-conscious that she was and how it took her a long time to get the confidence to feel good in her own skin about it. And I bring that up because I feel like many parents of kids who do feel self-conscious feel like their kid's the only one, right? I mean, my kid's all over the place, right? You've seen pictures of Benny probably if you've listened for a long time, and he's talked about it. He just doesn't care. He feels fine. But not every kid is like that, and there's nothing wrong with that. Not every kid has the experience that Benny did where he was supported. I don't think he was ever made fun of, but I don't know that for sure. And I know of so many kids who go through circumstances that are difficult, where kids are making fun of them and being dumb and saying dumb things like kids do. All of that to say, I'd urge you to listen to what Macy has to say. As I said, I'll link it up. And if you have a kid who's struggling, or if you as an adult are remembering that struggle, and maybe you're going through it now too, right? I mean, just because you're 30 or 70 doesn't mean you feel great about how you look in devices and things like that. If you're looking for some more confidence, some more reassurance, I hope that you find people like Macy and others in the community that can kind of bring you along and make you feel a little bit better. Look, I'm a mom of a kid with type 1. I don't know what it's like. I can't pretend to. I know if I suddenly had to wear devices, I might feel differently. So it's kind of easy for me to say that support can help, but I really think it can. I've certainly heard that from other people. And certainly when you're in the room with lots of other people wearing lots of devices and everybody's beeping, there's just nothing else like it. So great weekend. I love doing events. Love to come to yours in 2023. Please reach out if you'd like me to come speak or MC. I love doing it and I love meeting everybody. All right, no newscast this week. I hope everybody enjoys Thanksgiving. And unless there is some bananas breaking news, we are going to take the week off from the newscast, but back as per usual the week after Thanksgiving. Thank you as always to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.